Citizen. I'm your host, Tia Carol Jones. I'm here today with Brandon Johnson, candidate for mayor of the city of Chicago. Welcome to the show.
Hey Tia, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is a pretty nice setup over here.
Thank you for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm very blessed and fortunate to have been raised by two dynamic human beings. My father, who was a public employee, a general contractor, and he was a pastor. My mother, who was just a dynamic leader in the community as well, raised 10 of us in a home with one bathroom, and I sit right in the middle of my siblings, so I've learned what it means to serve through the life and the experience of having two parents who understood that the world was bigger than our immediate space and that we were not our own, and everything that we do is for the benefit of others. So I grew up learning how to share sweaters and everything else, and learned how to negotiate early in life, how to get in the bathroom before everyone else. And I took that experience that led me to doing youth development work in Cabrini Green. I eventually became a teacher in the city of Chicago. Started teaching 15 years ago, middle school students, taught on the west side at Westinghouse College Prep. We're on the west side of Chicago, by the way, where my wife of soon to be 25 years next year, we'll be celebrating 25 years of marriage. So Chicago, we're going to have the biggest surprise wedding anniversary in the history of Chicago, so keep that secret. But we raised in our family 3 children on the west side of Chicago, and served as an organizer with the Chicago Teachers Union. And then 4 years ago, I ran for a county board on a very dynamic platform that speaks to the interests of our people, fighting for health care, good paying jobs, an environment that clean air and clean water is available to us, and to have a budget that speaks to the interests of people, and to have the privilege again of serving as a teacher, as an organizer, and as a Cook County Commissioner, recently reelected, and looking forward to fighting for families across the city of Chicago. What my wife and I want for our 3 children, 8, 10, and 15. We want that for all families off the city of Chicago. So that's the short version of me, and I'm very humbled to be in a position now where the movement that brought me into this moment, that I'm grateful for, that I could help direct this city to be more equitable and just for working people.
Since 2018, you have been a Cook County Commissioner representing the 1st District. What led you to run for that office?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So look, when I set out to do service, I thought I was going to be a public school teacher for the rest of my life, and I enjoyed doing that. What we have experienced in Chicago for too long is that politics is just as mean as the weather. The weather is petty. It's like today. It's very windy today. It was like, okay, you don't want it to be cold, but take this wind, right? So, the way the wind works in this, and the way the temperature works in this city, unfortunately, our politics have been that way, been quite fickle, where those who have get more, and those who don't have, we continue to have things taken away from us, and from school closures to the closing of mental health clinics to the firing of Black workers in particular, especially educators and nurses. At the county level, the person who was there did not represent the interests of working people, supported a budget that stripped away the ability for families to take care of themselves. And the movement that pushed back against school closings, the movement that wanted to see democracy in our public education system, the movement that I was a part of as well to raise the minimum wage, wanted to see if we can elect someone like me on the west side of Chicago, also representing the western suburbs. And what really provoked, me to run was to see all the healthcare cuts at the county level. And I'm not sure if the listeners today have any experience with the Fantas Clinic at Cook County Hospital, but I do. I know what it's like to stand in long lines, waiting to see a doctor. Doors open at 7, maybe you see a doctor by 8, you got to come back at night hoping the prescription is ready. I grew up with asthma, and to see those type of services cut and removed from county government in the budget, that led me to step up, to run, to lead on a platform that expands healthcare, opens up health clinics, reforming our criminal justice system, and of course a budget that speaks to the lives of everyday people throughout the city of Chicago and Cook County. And so Rand built a very dynamic, broad set of leaders and support from around the county and quite frankly around the country, where people took interest in a county board race because they understand that if we're going to shift and change the political dynamics in this city, this county, this state, this country, we have to have people who are tethered to the community, that come from the working class, that understand what it takes to get into the middle class, but also have experiences of living, in poverty or below poverty. That provocation led to that run and to that win, my re-election. That's the same movement, quite frankly, that's building around me for me to become the next mayor of the city of Chicago.
In your role as Cook County Commissioner, how have you been able to make sure your constituents in the first district receive resources?
Yeah, so one of the things I'm very proud of as Cook County Commissioner, there are 2 or 3 dynamics. The first thing that I want to just lift up is that when I got elected 4 years ago, I was the lead sponsor in legislation that was entitled the Just Housing Amendment. And essentially what we did was we eliminated discrimination against those who are formerly incarcerated for being able to access housing. And this was especially important because in the first district alone, the west side of Chicago, the vast majority of individuals who are returning citizens in Chicago, they're coming back to the first district. And they're here anyways. They're living on couches. They're finding housing in SROs. They're finding housing to the best of their ability. But without housing, though, without that type of stability, it's hard to access jobs and other dynamics to get them into a position where they can be far more productive than they have been in the past, right? And so we passed that, right? And so that opened up opportunities for millions of families across of Cook County, particularly in the first district as well. The second thing that I'm very proud of, I sponsored what was called the Justice for Black Lives legislation, as well as the Budget for Black Lives legislation. Both of those pieces of legislation led to what the board president has articulated as her equity plan, as well as the equity dollars. And so as a result of that, we have the largest amount of dollars going into public safety from Cook County government, the largest amount in the history of Cook County government. $75 million that we secured. $25 million came to the first district alone to address many of the critical issues that we know could ultimately lead to safer communities and reducing violence. But those dollars were spread throughout Cook County. Here's the other thing that's very dynamic. So we have the largest guaranteed income program in the entire country, $42 million. That's also the result of the leadership that I've demonstrated at the county level. $42 million, the vast majority of individuals that qualified, Black women, right? Because we know that in the city of Chicago, and particularly Black women are overwhelmingly heads of households, right? So it was important that we push for legislation that will lead to ends meeting, or at least closer at the end of each month, so that they can support families. I think the other component of that as well is that we secured $10 million to eliminate up to $1 billion of medical debt. Here's why that's important. So my mother died from a very rare heart disease. My father lost his job, went through the grievance process. He did get his job back, but by that time, my mother, her health had failed. And my mother died simply because we did not have access to a W-2. And the only way you can get access to a W-2 in this country primarily is through, the only way you can get access to health care is primarily through a W-2, right? And that's not fair. I actually believe that health care is a human right. I mean, many people believe that. And so the medical debt, it wasn't just that my mother died from this heart disease. It's not just the fact that my father did not have a job to have health care, to be able to provide the support that my mother needed. It's the fact that once she died, we're now mired and we're overwhelmed by medical debt, which you could lose everything, not just life, but you can literally lose your livelihood, right? And so we're in a position now at the county level where we can eliminate up to $1 billion of medical debt that can be transformative for families who are struggling to make the ends meet anyways, right? And so from violence prevention dollars to universal guaranteed basic income to working with the formerly incarcerated to eliminating medical debt, we've expanded healthcare. 40,000 more families have access to county care as a result of that. Supported, the workers at the Loretto Hospital, for example, on the west side of Chicago, where 70% of the families there receive health care through the Affordable Care Act, through county care. 40% of the workers there live in Austin. These are just a couple of examples of how my leadership at the county board has directly impacted the people that I serve. And I'm going to do that as mayor of Chicago. I just get to serve more people.
Why did you decide to run for mayor of the city of Chicago?
I mentioned at the start of the show that the best job that I've ever had is that of a public school teacher. So I started teaching in Cabrini Green, middle school, loved it. It's still the best job that I've ever had. And I know people, kind of give me that look, like, look, you taught middle school kids and you enjoyed it. So listen, my father really wanted me. I think he wanted me to go into the ministry. And of course I rebelled like many children. But I think becoming a teacher is about as close as you can be to getting to heaven, no matter what I do now. But what was, hard about that position, as much as I loved it, was that if you know anything about Cabrini Green, this is a dynamic, community. My aunt raised my cousins there. She was a teacher's assistant and was a CTU member. Two of my cousins, her daughters, became educators. One a counselor, another one eventually went into administration. So we still talk to her though, but she left the rank and file. But my students would wake up every single day and they would look outside their back windows and they could see downtown. They could see it, they could hear it, they could smell it, but could not experience the wealth of this city. Out of their front windows, they saw bulldozers staring at them, preparing to destroy their public housing. So we have families waking up every single day in the city of Chicago where they are chasing down an economy that's behind them, while everything in front of us is crumbling. And one of the wealthiest cities in the wealthiest country, at the wealthiest time in the history of the world, no one should be too poor to live in the city of Chicago. And that's why I'm running. To shift an economy that speaks to the needs of people, where you don't have to have losers at the expense of someone else winning. That there's enough for everyone. And I want to build an economy that speaks to the interests of everyday people, but that sets up individuals who have lost for too long in this city, can actually experience the wealth of this city, and no one has to lose. That's why I'm running for mayor of Chicago. Ultimately to build bridges, not raise them.
How has your previous experience prepared you to serve as mayor?
So, again, like I said, I grew up in a home with my parents were not just pastors and, raising 10 children. They also were foster parents. So as you can imagine, our home was chaotic at times, right? Growing up in a home where sometimes, as hard as my father worked, I know what it's like to come home and your lights are not on. I remember as a child, and God bless my father for his hard work, but that long orange extension cord that would go from our window to the neighbor's window, just to make sure that the electricity worked for the time in which we were without. And, growing up in those circumstances where things did not always work out, even with our best effort, there was always community and culture that would collaborate and come together and figure out how to make it work and how to make life a little bit better. That experience growing up in that type of environment, it's called me to a higher sense of responsibility. So being in the middle, I have to be accountable to my big brothers and sisters and responsible for my younger brothers and sisters, right? So as you can imagine, I'm probably a pretty emotional person. Like, my wife has to deal with it mostly. The city of Chicago, as voters, you won't have to deal with that. My wife will deal with it. She's been doing well for the last 25 years. But it's those experiences, and my experience as a classroom teacher, as an organizer. Many people thought that elected representative school board in this city was not possible. We organized and we changed that. People didn't think that we could actually have civilian oversight of policing in this city. We organized and we changed that. On the county board, working with 16 different commissioners, a board president, was it 10, 11 different separately elected countywide officials, from a sheriff to the chief judge to a clerk to the treasurer. You have to work with all these folks to come up with one budget, right? I've done that. And again, the experiences that I've had growing up, the experiences that I've had as a teacher, as an organizer, as a Cook County commissioner, has well positioned me to be able to manage the complexities of the budget in the city of Chicago. I've done that. Being able to manage the complexities of just relationships and personalities. We'll have 50 alder persons, working with all of them, different departments. I mean, these are things that requires not just vision, it requires someone who has the love, conviction, and the desire and the capacity, the competency to be able to do that. And the middle child of Andrew and Wilma Jean is looking forward to doing that.
So the field for mayor of the city of Chicago is large and growing every day. What sets you apart from the other candidates?
I don't believe there's anyone in this city that would disagree that public safety is the top issue for wherever you live in the city, whether it's Ravenswood or Inglewood, Jefferson Park, McKinley Park, wherever you live in this city, you're thinking about the safety of your family. And I don't believe there's anyone else in this race that has more of an incentive for this city to work than a man raising a family on the west side of Chicago. No one. My wife and I, we live in Austin. We love it. It's a beautiful community. I believe it's the largest black city, if you will, inside of a city. It's 80,000. That number has reduced because of the type of disinvestment that we've seen from the politics over the course of 20 plus years now. But we recently changed one of the windows in our children's bedroom from one of the bullets that have come through our home. A few years ago, before the pandemic, gunshots outside of our home. You can hear it. My wife hits the ground. I hit the ground. I hear our kids screaming in their rooms. We're crawling to their rooms, angry, afraid, scared. Just hoping and praying that it's not our turn to be on the news. I see my kids cornered. We never taught them that. Covering themselves. We cover them until the shot stopped. So the shot stopped firing. When my 15-year-old gets on this bike, it's hard because I don't want him to ride his bike. Because bike rides can end in tragedy. It shouldn't be that way. In order for this city to work for people who have those lived experiences, you need someone who is connected to those experiences every single day. What sets me apart is just that. I've served as a teacher, as an organizer, lived in this city. I'm raising a family. We send our children to public schools. We rely upon the parks. We rely upon public transportation. We rely upon the community to help us have stability. That's the lived experience no matter where you are in this city. I want for my family, I want for every family in the city of Chicago. I don't believe there's anyone else in this race that has not just the lived experience, but the day-to-day experience of what it's like to live in Chicago. Look, we live in Austin and we drive to Hyde Park to drop off our eldest for school. We drive to the northwest side, Porter's Park, to drop off the two babies. Because there's not a school on the west side of Chicago that offers orchestra. Shouldn't be that way. You're going to have someone who actually believes in the city of Chicago, but more importantly, believes in the people of the city of Chicago. Because it's the people that have placed us in this position in this moment to bring about the type of substantial change that this city deserves. So that's going to set me apart. And I actually believe that I'm the only pastor's kid on the panel as well. So I'm sure I'm the only PK.
As mayor, how will you ensure that disinvested communities receive much needed resources and support?
This is heavy. This is the burden that we have as government. And as I spoke earlier about the equity plan, and I appreciate the leadership of President Preckwinkle, And she gave a lot of room for individuals like myself to help influence this budget. I've done it as a county commissioner. I've done it. You know, I've worked with my colleagues who represent more the expansive nature of their districts. They have more wealth in their districts than I would, right? And working with colleagues to challenge their residents to articulate why the budget that we put forth placed greater emphasis in districts like mine. I've done it as an organizer, I've done it as an educator, I've done it as a county commissioner. And the way you ensure that that happens, you actually have to lay out a vision. I've done it as a county commissioner. You actually have to set budgets and priorities and work with your colleagues so that those who have continue to have and those who don't get the ability to have some. It's why this equity plan is so important. When we were distributing the dollars for ARPA and during this 100-year pandemic, many of the villages that I represent, like Maywood and Bellwood, right? The west side of Chicago. I mean, you know, Maywood that's just west side, right? It's still family, right? And so many of the experiences that, you know, our families have endured over the course of generations of disinvestment, we've set a new course. The city of Chicago was well positioned. This is still Chicago. And I want people to understand and know that. There's this toughness about our city, our ability to thrive in some of the most extreme circumstances. That there's value to that, but we should not be okay with the type of chaos and disinvestment as a means to demonstrate how tough we are. There's enough in the city of Chicago where we can develop our toughness, right? If you're a Cubs fan or a Bears fan, there's enough toughness you develop just rooting for the Bears, right? It shouldn't be toughness because you dodge bullets, right? And so you're going to have a mayor in me who actually believes in people. That I'm raising my family in a community that's been disinvested in. These are my neighbors. This is family. I live it every day. I'll say it like this. Look, if you have a particular part of your body that's ailing and you do not address it, eventually that's going to impact the rest of the body. So you got to go and concentrate where the needs are. I've done it. I'm looking forward to doing it as mayor of Chicago. I know I'm sounding a little preachy, you know, but really, in order for the body to work, to be whole, you got to make sure that we're treating the trauma and we're not exacerbating the trauma. For too long, politics in Chicago has exacerbated the trauma. Closing schools, closing mental health clinics, right? That's some of the most mean, wicked things you can do to people. You're closing schools, shutting down jobs, you're destroying public housing. While the wealth of the city continues to expand, there are families across the city just trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B. We have to make it more convenient for people to live in Chicago. Right now, we have many inconveniences. And I think the worst part about that is that politics in Chicago, they treat us like somehow we've done something wrong for wanting to have a city that works. And that we are an inconvenience to those who want to see this city explode in one of the most dramatic ways in terms of concentration of wealth, while the rest of us are just struggling every single day to get the ends to meet. I'm going to ensure that working people in this city, no matter where you are, you'll have a mayor that has the lived experience and a commitment to doing that.
What is your vision for the city of Chicago?
That it works for everyone. There's so much opportunity here in the city of Chicago, especially for our young people. You know, something that I'm committed to doing, especially because of the work that I've done as an organizer, as a teacher. I've seen what hopelessness looks like. I've looked into children's eyes who have despair. Like I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. You know, my 15-year-old, he talks to me sometimes, right? My 8 and 10-year-old, you can't tell them what's impossible. They dream big still. You have dreams being snatched away from children where they don't see their lives beyond 20, 18, or their block. Because we don't give them opportunities to explore, to see the wealth of this city, to experience it, to benefit from it. And so my vision for the city of Chicago is to make sure that young people in particular have purpose, that families who want to own a home have an opportunity to do that. You know, my wife and I, between the two of us, 6 degrees, and there were still 2 government programs that we applied for to purchase our first home. We were making a combined income 13 years ago. We bought our home 14 years ago. $75,000 with 1 child at the time. Sometimes I think about how irresponsible it was of us to have a child with those salaries, right? I mean, think about, you know, and we are well off comparatively to the rest of the folks in the neighborhood and certainly in my family. And that wasn't enough. And if it weren't for those 2 programs, we would not be homeowners. Gave us down payment assistance. Like, the vision for Chicago is actually pretty straightforward, that no one has to lose at the expense of someone else winning. There's enough for everyone. And creating youth summer hiring programs that we can make year round, giving them purpose and opportunity to actually earn a paycheck, develop a skill, value, and we demonstrate that we value them and their lives. I'll do that as mayor. We can revive this city. We can. Because there are enough people who are committed to that. We have just had politicians in the way. I won't be in the way. I'll be a part of that revival.
Where can people go to find out more about you and your campaign?
Yeah, so don't talk to my cousins because they might tell you another side of me, right? So stay away from cousins. No, you can talk to my cousins too. But they can go to BrandonForChicago.com. All of the platforms were there: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. If you go there, you can check me out there. You can look up the legislation. You can just Google, you know, Brandon Johnson, Cook County Commissioner, Brandon Johnson, teacher, Brandon Johnson, organizer. All of those things will give you hits. But I really would encourage folks to go to the website, to follow me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, to follow this campaign, because I'm telling the stories of people who have the lived experience that I have. And we're going to elevate that, we're going to lift that up, and we're going to make sure that not only do we organize around those values, we're going to lead with those values. So please go to BrandonForChicago.com.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else you think our audience should know?
Yeah, so I've shared this story a couple of times, and it's been a real inspiration for my family during this run. You know, we don't talk enough about mental health, you know, particularly within the Black community. We're getting better at it. You know, more of our people are seeking counseling and therapy, and I believe there's benefit to that. And as much as I love my parents, you know, I grew up in the Church of God in Christ, and so we spent a lot of time on the altar. And my older brother, who is my hero, was the first to go to college. He was one of the top wrestlers in the entire state of Illinois. Played the saxophone, was just a dynamic human being, but he had untreated trauma. And eventually led to his addiction. And my brother died unhoused with mental health challenges and addicted. And he would be a grandfather today. His niece and nephews, they're doing okay. But I really want the city of Chicago to know that I am committed to not just making sure that we have good education, transportation, healthcare, jobs, our parks and recreation, but I want people to know that I'm committed to the healing of our community. Because I believe that if we would have had the language 25, 30 years ago, I believe my brother would have had a better fighting chance. And so reopening our mental health clinics and investing in individuals who are like my brother, who are recovering, who can connect to those families, that the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, if you want help, we'll have it for you. And I want that to be something that our families really think about here, that the loss and the harm and the trauma that we have experienced, not making excuses for our behavior, but we certainly don't want our behavior to not be treated with the type of dignity and respect that we deserve. And that help is available. You'll have that with me as mayor of Chicago. And I want to thank you for just your time and this incredible atmosphere that you have established here. Like, I want to just chill out here every day if I can. So, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Remember to make plans to join us again next week for Conversations with the Citizen. The place where real news